Ray Leach, how are you?
I'm great, Jack.
Good. Thanks
Great
for
to be
joining
together.
me. Yeah, great to see you again, and really appreciate your taking time to talk with me. Ray, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I think that very fitting that you are a guest on the very first one of these that I've done for TEDCO, and talk about all sorts of things. So I want to talk about diversity and inclusion and what we face, and want to talk about what we do as investors on behalf of our respective states. But I want to start off a little bit with how we've known each other, and very interesting background to me. I want you to talk a little bit about that. But first time I met you was at Tech Town in Detroit. And you came in and we were trying to figure out how do we really empower the entrepreneurial community in Detroit. And you came in from Ohio with a lot of really interesting ideas. And one of those was swim lanes. And I want to come back to that. And then we worked with each other a little bit when I was at University of Michigan and still refining our model in the venture program there. And then at Cleveland Clinic, when we were neighbors and co-investors on a few deals as well.
Right.
And, I think that, you've been a common denominator for me. And, the fact that I called you up and said, hey, how are you managing this diversity and inclusion? What do you, well, you actually have been doing some stuff with Venture Forward and want to talk with you about that as well. But just in terms of your background, if you don't mind just spending a couple minutes, Ray, talking about, where you've been and where you're going.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jack. And I really appreciate the opportunity. TEDCO has been a leader in the technology-based economic development and venture investing world previous to my involvement in getting involved in this niche industry, right? So the venture capital industry, it packs a huge punch. It hits way, way harder than the size of the industry in terms of its economic impact. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty small industry. Then you have the things that JumpStart and TEDCO do, and many and a handful of other handfuls of other organizations across the country. And we're kind of a subset of that larger venture ecosystem. But briefly, I'm the founding CEO of a 501c3 called JumpStart, headquartered in Cleveland. And we've been at it for 17 years now, since 2004. And our original focus was solely on the technology-based innovation economy, whether it was technologies coming out of universities or institutions or out of the broader community. And we still, over half of our activities at JumpStart today are still focused on the tech industry. But we've also expanded not just to ensure that Black, Latinx, Hispanic, female tech founders are supported and invested in, but also we've been involved in diverse and ambitious entrepreneurs that are running a broader set of small companies. So while JumpStart was founded as a technology-based economic development 501c3, we are still that, but we're also quite a bit more. So over the last 17 years, we've invested about $70 million in technology startups, headquartered originally in Cleveland, but now all across Ohio. And those companies have gone on to raise billions of dollars of follow-on capital and employ tens of thousands of Ohioans. And we have since also evolved. So now we have a mixture of both for-profit funds managed by the team at JumpStart, as well as our evergreen funds or nonprofit funds. So as you know, economic development is a marathon. It's a generational kind of challenge, particularly for parts of the country, such as the Midwest, that have really gone through or in the process of continuing to go through a big transformation. So, I'd be lying if I said some days didn't feel like 2 steps forward and a step back, given the headwinds that places like Ohio have been challenged with. But when I take a step back, I am encouraged. There's been a ton of progress made over the last 17 years in terms of the venture ecosystems of the Midwest and, of course, in many regions across the country.
Yeah. And you've had some great exits too that I want to ask you about. But trying to step our way into the conversation, the very first time we spoke, in Detroit a while ago.
Right.
You mentioned, swim lanes, this concept of swim lanes, and, here I am in Maryland, there you are in Ohio. Why in the world would we be sharing any information at all? We're competing, after all, for these companies, for these, really disruptive technologies and entrepreneurs. What is it that you're looking at? What is it? And I think it's been a common theme for you. I don't know if it's changed much, but I think it's been a common theme for you in this swim lane concept. Tell me more about that.
Well, I think for first, at the end of the day, for the majority of the country, all economic development is local. I actually don't believe that JumpStart in Ohio or the upper Midwest is competing with TEDCO. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, maybe some people would have that point of view. And of course, talent, the importance of talent and inventors is really important. But I think the biggest challenge that JumpStart has been really focused on, and we've evolved, we're not just an investing entity and a direct service entity, but we also fund dozens of other organizations. There'll be whether it's the state of Ohio or maybe a large corporation or a large foundation who wants to see economic transformation in a place or in a state. And those funders are looking for a partner who can not only do great work themselves, but can connect to other organizations. And that might be a little bit in the vernacular of swim lanes. So one of the things JumpStart has learned over and over and over again is that partnerships, particularly when it relates to proximity to a place or proximity and knowledge to an industry, are absolutely critical. Yeah. There's no way, even, JumpStart is 70 people. So, we do have a large team. We are involved with thousands of entrepreneurs each year, both tech entrepreneurs and small businesses. But JumpStart is never going to have the insight that is optimum to be able to move a neighborhood or a community or a set of companies in a particular industry. We alone are unable, or it's really just not practical or efficient to be able to do that on our own. So everything JumpStart does, whether it's investing in seed stage startups or Series A startups, or advancing an industry group that's important to the regions we work in, we do everything through partnerships.
Yeah.
And so, the saying, two heads are better than one. We'll take 6, 8, 10 heads together working on solving a problem, whether it's for a company or for a larger economic development challenge. We'd much prefer to work in collaboration and figure out the win-win.
Yeah. Like
a lot of things in life, if you can figure out the win-win,
yeah.
And a way to partner and collaborate, you're going to get a lot further, a lot faster.
Yeah, so that swim lane concept really is just a division of labor, not a divisiveness.
Correct.
Sharpen your elbows and get people out of the way. That was one of the best lessons that I learned from you, and I did learn from you back then. So and try to carry that forward. We both have similar stakeholders with our state legislature, and you talked about investing in companies at an early stage, and tell us about one of the big successes that you've had, and I know you've had several, but tell us about one that is near and dear to your heart.
Well, the one that's the most meaningful to Ohio and to JumpStart at the end of the day is a firm called Cover My Meds. So Cover My Meds was a business founded in Northeast Ohio, in Twinsburg, Ohio. And it had a really, really unusual and compelling founding team. A father, son were two of the three founders, and then another gentleman who was really expert in terms of the market in the industry. And they were really around the authentication or verification of prescriptions. So if you went into the doctor's office and you were prescribed a particular thing and were going to go to a pharmacy, what's the ecosystem that connects the pharmacy, the doctor, the pharmaceutical company, and the pharmacy? They were able to solve with kind of a software as a service delivery mechanism to solve a very, very, very big problem. And so we were a founding investor in Cover My Meds at the seed stage. There's all sorts of incredible outcomes that have come out of that. From an economic development point of view, today, Cover My Meds, I believe they employ over 2,000 folks today. They just built they were acquired by McKesson in 2017. It was the first unicorn exit of a tech startup in the state of Ohio. But now they've just built an incredible headquarter campus in Columbus. And they're employing, thousands of Ohioans. And of course, they're part of the McKesson family of companies, so they have a global impact. At the same time, I think the other thing that would be important for your listeners to understand, and the reason why Cover My Meds was so important to JumpStart, while we've had 25 exits from when we started investing in 2005, one of the reasons why Cover My Meds was so material is the first 45 to 50 million JumpStart has invested as an organization, we've done through what we call internally our evergreen funds, meaning those were funds compiled or built over a decade, maybe $1 million, $2 million, some years maybe as much as $4 or $5 million that was added into that fund in partnership with the state of Ohio, originally as grants and later as loans from the state. But the other matching money from the state came from philanthropy in Ohio and investment returns. So JumpStart has been matching these state monies over the last 15 years or so. So when JumpStart makes an investment out of our Evergreen Fund, that fund does not have any traditional LPs, nor does it have GPs. So if we invest $500,000 into a business, and that business 8-10 years later returns a $10 million exit to JumpStart, 100% of that 10 million comes to JumpStart to advance our charitable purpose. Unlike if that return came to a traditional fund, 80% of the profit would go to the limited partners and 20% would be shared by the team. Well, at JumpStart, one of the reasons why we've been successful or have the ability to continue to make impact is this unusual and unique and powerful nature of this $50 million that we've been able to raise and invest as an evergreen entity. We have since raised more traditional funds on the for-profit side. So we do have investors now that invest principally for a return, but that founding, I say founding, it took 13 years to raise that money in pieces and parts, but that is a big part of JumpStart's secret sauce to have generated a lot of momentum in Ohio with early stage investing, but then to be able to sustain the momentum, not just to make additional tech investments, but also to broaden, I describe it as kind of broadening the aperture of our work so that we can focus on diverse and ambitious entrepreneurs, not just in tech, but outside of tech that have the greatest interest and ability to create jobs.
So Cover My Meds is a great story. And, the economic impact with the jobs and the company, McKesson buying it, I'm sure that there were some legislature folks that were worried about the company moving out of Ohio. But there's more to it than that as well, right? I had the privilege of meeting the founder when I was in Cleveland, and what a great guy. And
oh yeah,
I think that, one of the things that people forget about these great exits are you just created some millionaires as well. So tell me a little bit about those guys. Are they starting to redeploy some capital, become angel investors and that type of thing, and executives in residence? And are you leveraging that talent as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 3-year kind of earnout, 3 to 4 year earnout, depending on where you were on the management team of that company, those have all played out now. So we have not only the founders that have left the business on a day-to-day basis, but also kind of a lot of the senior management team is now transitioning onto new startups and or getting involved in the venture ecosystem. So yeah, we're absolutely seeing the benefits of the talent and the experience that hundreds of people. Now, there's also been a ton of spin outs of Cover My Meds. So there's been over a half a dozen companies that have raised significant venture capital of leaders that formerly were at Cover My Meds that are now running their own companies. At the same time, though, it would be important to mention the taxes that the founders and other stakeholders of Cover My Meds paid, capital gains taxes, obviously income taxes, were quite material. So the the very, very, very modest investment that the state of Ohio ended up making in Cover My Meds, which, I don't know, the math, it was probably in the $300,000 to $400,000 range is what the state invested. JumpStart matched that money, has generated an astronomical return for the state in terms of income tax, capital gains tax, and job creation. So that's probably no one's run the numbers nationally, but my guess is from a state perspective, that is the kind of investment that is a huge game changer and provides additional incentive and momentum for why Ohio continues to do what it does, but also other states believe this is an important part of their economic development strategy.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So this might be kind of a strange way into the next question, but you're talking about the tax revenues that you get, and a lot of discussion that is going on about tax base relative to where people live. So,
right.
We've got virtual offices. I think really interesting discussion on Andreessen Horowitz A16Z podcast about, we put the team in the cloud. We put the conference room in the cloud. Well, that's kind of where the corporate office is in the cloud. So, where's the office? Where's the address now?
Right.
And I think the IRS has to figure out the tax implications of that, right? But when you look at that whole dynamic, what, if any, changes have you made relative to COVID? Whether it's a simple investment presentation from a founder, or when you look at the implications of making an investment across county lines or across state lines.
Yeah, well, I think we've maybe, as an organization and as a venture community, we're maybe 5 to 10% into our learnings of what the actual impact of all of the COVID experience has been. I think we'll see more change, not only in tax policy, but in kind of investment thesis and importance of geography. Incredibly dynamic question and issue. JumpStart historically has been limited because of our partnership with the state more than anything else. We've been limited to the state border. So while we've been investing across Ohio for about 5 years, our principal focus originally was Northeast Ohio. It's a region of about 4 million people, but now we're investing all across the state and have been for some time. But I do anticipate and envision we will, particularly with our for-profit funds, start investing more aggressively in other states. And I do think there's a compelling advantage in many dimensions. Actually, I was just on the phone with a founder right before this podcast, where the 3 founders are, one's in California, one's in New York City, one's in Michigan. And they really have an interest in creating the company in Cleveland. And so, I'm not saying that we might not have had a conversation like that 5, 10 years ago. We might have, but I think we're going to have those conversations now a significant percentage of the time. And that would be true for really any geography. Of course, healthcare is a huge driver to be in the Cleveland market. Also, our longstanding history in manufacturing is a reason to be here. But I think, certainly all the dynamics of the portfolio company needing to be, a half hour away from the office, the classic Silicon Valley story. I think those days are long gone. That's never coming back. So no. I think that provides a competitive advantage for states like Maryland and Ohio and others, because this technology and the ability to run a company on the cloud really causes a lot of these proximity and locale issues to evaporate.
Yeah.
So I think that's an incredibly good thing for the venture industry, particularly for the 45 states that represent maybe 14% of it or 15% of the entire industry.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about what the impact of all this is going to mean for us as investors. And of course, I'm in this from an economic development perspective for the country. So I think this is the game-changing moment for folks that are focused on achieving the kinds of goals and outcomes that TEDCO and JumpStart are focused on.
Yeah, you've spent a lot of time focused on this, across the country as well. And know you were involved with the National Venture Capital Association, the NVCA. I think, maybe appropriately and sadly, this is the 1 year anniversary of George Floyd's death today.
Right, right.
Spending some time talking about, diversity and inclusion is top of many people's minds, especially today. But your involvement with the NVCA and then focus on Venture Forward. Tell me a little bit about that program and what the impact you hope that will have.
Sure, sure. Well, first, let me just share a minute or so on my personal story as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then I'll connect to the NVCA and to Venture Forward. So when I got involved in economic development in Ohio in 2004, I had zero understanding and appreciation of what it means to be a Black American, let alone Hispanic or disabled, or I didn't understand the privilege that I had as being a younger middle-aged white guy. I had no clue what all the advantages that I had. So in the early days of JumpStart, in our very founding form back in 2004, we had leaders on our executive team that were focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because Cleveland or JumpStart was headquartered in a majority city. So it wasn't like that wasn't something of importance. But from a personal point of view, I didn't understand how important it might be. And then so we've always focused and invested in Black, Latinx, female founders. I'm proud that 20% of the companies that JumpStart's invested in have Black founders or Black senior managers. And about 45% of the companies we've invested in have a woman founder or a woman leader on the senior management team. So,
those are some great stats, Ray.
Yeah,
that's good. I could be better, obviously, for all of us, but that's really good.
So I share that because while we had that intentionality and we had those outcomes, it was really when I first got connected to the Obama administration in 2011, which I had really no connection to them, but I had the opportunity to serve on the National Advisory Council for Innovation and Entrepreneurship that was founded in the Obama administration. And it was through that experience that not only you and I connected, and that JumpStart started to do some work in other cities, just kind of advisory work, but I got to see on a firsthand basis what the need, the challenge, and the impact, what the need was in the minority communities across the country, but also the impact that organizations like JumpStart could potentially have to serve not only Black and Latinx founders and women founders in the tech world, but more broadly. And then shortly after that, I was invited to join the board of the National Venture Capital Association as really representing two things, I would guess, if I had to look back. One was the Midwest, and the second was a seed stage fund. Most or many members, particularly back then, were of the board of the National Venture Capital Association were larger funds, and many of the funds were on the coast. So as I joined the board of the NVCA, it was in the early days of their increasing understanding and transformation around issues and challenges related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in the early days of the NVCA is around the time of the Ellen Powell lawsuit with Kleiner Perkins. And so there was lots of conversation in the venture industry around gender discrimination and the participation of women in venture funds. But at the same time, the NVCA was recognizing the numbers as it related to race in the founders, with the exception of white males and typically Asian males and many immigrant Indian founders, with the exception of those three races, that there wasn't much representation across the industry. So I was part of the Inclusion and Diversity Task Force of the National Venture Capital Association. This is in the 2012 to 2015 timeframe, where the NVCA was talking about thinking about what more it could do to begin to track data, to have that data inform what the actions of the industry could be, should be. There was a pledge that hundreds of venture funds that are members of the NVCA took 3-4 years ago to increase their ability to move the needle, whether it's investing in companies led by people of color, or hiring more investment professionals and team members in that dimension. And then that work has really continued. Almost a year ago now, the NVCA announced the creation of a brand new 501c3 with the NVCA is a C6. It's a member organization. So this is a sister organization to the C6. That's a 501c3 called Venture Forward. And Venture Forward is now championing, along with, of course, the NVCA, the goals and objectives of around diversifying the venture ecosystem and industry. And that also includes geography. So how do we increase the relevance, importance, and the support of actors in the venture ecosystem, entrepreneurs, investors across the entire United States? So I'm really proud of being a founding board member there, and they've partnered with the University of California at Berkeley with a whole set of online coursework. They're also doing things in terms of education and connecting more diverse founders and venture capitalists to the venture ecosystem. So, we got a long way to go for the venture ecosystem to reflect equity. But I am encouraged by the level of energy, passion, intentionality, and to your point, in honor of George Floyd today, and all the Black and Hispanic Americans and Americans that face discrimination, intentional and unintentional discrimination on a day-to-day basis. I and JumpStart and the organizations Venture Forward and the NVCA, and of course many others, are really wanting to move the needle, do it with intentionality and empathy. So it's a really important part of our work.
Yeah, that is so good to hear. And, I think that, but who am I to say that, right? I think that's one of the things that I find is, I think I get it, but I don't get it. And, I think that there's some really interesting discussions and conversations I've had around here. Bottom line is they're uncomfortable, but we have to have those discussions. We have to have those uncomfortable discussions. There's a great series by, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. I think we should have uncomfortable conversations with a Black investor, uncomfortable conversations with a Latinx entrepreneur, to really lean into those discussions and ensure that we do start to get it. Maybe someday we will. But Venture Forward, great program. I think it is that intentionality. I think that we all have to purposefully go find people that we've not worked with before.
Right. And there's so many ways that everyone in the venture ecosystem can play a larger role. And I think, again, what I would encourage listeners to this podcast, particularly if you're a white male or a person of any gender or color that's really uncomfortable with this conversation, I'd really encourage people to read, reflect, study up, ask questions, listen, be open to perspective, criticism, critique, and most importantly, partnership. Yeah. So to your point, who you're spending your time with, what you're reading. I know in my case, whether it was the writings of Martin Luther King or James Baldwin, along with an incredible number of contemporary writers that I have spent the last almost 10 years now reading consistently, has helped me a lot. And since the white men, just to make it simple, in the venture industry have much of the power, at one time had all the power and the influence and the decision making, our ability as an industry and as a country to make a bigger difference, a lot of that is going to happen because of what white men do, or what they don't do. And so I appreciate the sentiments and the work that a lot of white men are doing right now to better understand the issue and obviously work to improve this, because at the end of the day, this is not a zero-sum game. This is an opportunity for all Americans to do better, including white men and their families.
Yeah, well said. And I like your point. It's not only what we do, but what we don't do. I found myself on a call the other day and it was all a bunch of white guys like me, and
Right.
I just raised my hand and I was like, where's the diversity in this call?
Right.
Because, it just struck me, that there was a screen full of people that look exactly like me, and how intimidating that must be, if you're not. So let's continue to have those uncomfortable conversations and push that. I think that's important. Yeah, I guess in closing, areas of interest that you're seeing with JumpStart. I know that you and I came close to doing a deal together on some blockchain technology, a very, very interesting space. And just curious if there's an area that seems to be kind of precipitating to the top as JumpStart continues to invest.
Yeah, well, certainly as an investor, I guess the area that has been obviously very, very hot and growing that we continue to be focused on is SaaS and enterprise software, particularly in healthcare, given the proximity and the density and the importance of the medical industry in Cleveland. One of the areas that Cleveland and Ohio also has a unique advantage is in augmented and virtual reality. We have Case Western Reserve University here in Cleveland that has been a real innovator in and around leveraging that technology for particular applications. In fact, we have a brand new medical school here in Cleveland that's a collaboration with Case and the Cleveland Clinic that has a cadaver lab where all the cadavers are basically virtual. So that would be an example of something that we think is incredibly exciting. And I know we've all been, at least if you're anything like me, I watch all the Apple podcasts and I read up on a lot of things in the technology space around augmented and virtual reality. And, we really haven't seen the impact that I think many of us had hoped to see. And I think that this next decade is going to be a great opportunity to see, incredible innovations. I think our world will look or feel and we'll experience it totally differently 10 years from now. So that's an area that we have a particular interest in and are going to try to build a kind of a cluster of competency and unique capability at the intersection of AR, VR, and healthcare.
Yeah, that's great. And, you've been, like I said at the beginning, you've been hugely helpful to me as I've gone from one job to the next over the last couple of decades. What can TEDCO, what can Marilyn do to help you out at JumpStart? What are a couple of thoughts that we might be able to do to help you out?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that, at the end of the day, I might be in Cleveland, I'm an Ohioan or a Buckeye, but I'm really in this for the future of our country. And TEDCO, again, has been a pioneer. It's an organization that many of us have learned from over the last handful of decades. And so the first and probably most important thing is continue to do what you've been doing and that you aspire to do to move your regional economy, whether it's Maryland or the Mid-Atlantic forward, because regions like the Mid-Atlantic and the Midwest are going to merge and morph in the coming decade or two. I think we are going to be obviously, we all know that our regions or our subregions have real economic power. And I have a great interest, particularly in the emerging funds that are coming out of the Midwest and places like the Mid-Atlantic, that we do a lot more deals together. I do think, that I would have never guessed that I would have said in 2021 that Silicon Valley has any real likelihood of losing momentum, but I think in reality that has happened, and of course it's going to continue to lead the country for quite some time. But I think this is the time for the rest of the country to continue to effort forward, do the things that we want to do, need to do, and are important to do at a local level, but begin to connect the dots more in regions. I mean, you're only 6 hours away from where I'm standing. So there's no reason why over time we couldn't be even learning more from each other. Certainly we can be doing that, but also it's my hope that we'll be, or individuals that are working for our organizations now that raise funds into the future, they will be co-investing because of course this is a super regional game if you want to maximize your return. So I'm really encouraged and excited that we have the opportunity in our own organizations, but more broadly to really move the needle and to generate a lot more momentum. Hopefully regions like ours will be a third of the industry in 10 to 15 years, not just 15% of the industry as it is today.
Yeah. Well, Ray, thanks so much for your leadership. Great work at JumpStart. Really appreciate it. Anytime, as always, call me if I can be helpful, because you're always that way with me. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ray.